His intestine walls started to burst open and he started to lose a lot of blood. They even had to do 10 blood transplants within half a day on this man. They moved him into a room where the bed could start to move so they can get his blood circulating more. They also noticed that he had a lot of bed sores and his eyes started to bleed. His skin was seeping moisture and he was losing around 10 liters of water every single day. I'm drinking some water. We have all made mistakes before. Maybe it was something you did when you were younger, maybe it's something you did when you were older, I don't know, but either way, we all came back from this mistake. It wasn't anything that affected us in a way that would end our own lives. Something unbearable happened to this guy, and it was because of one slip up, and his whole life went completely downhill for almost 3 months. Make sure you guys watch this video till the end because this gets really messed up for him, like really bad, bro. The Tokaimara nuclear power plant was made in 1988 in a small Japanese village known as Tokai. This power plant was operated by JCO, also known as the Japanese Nuclear Fusion Company. For 10 years, they supplied experimental reactors to the Japanese science community, but they were never actually a part of the energy grid. They just provided energy to the other facilities, using stuff like nuclear fuel rods. And this was big for Japan's nuclear community because this place made 3 tons annually of uranium for the nuclear power plant. And the process of how they made this uranium was very dangerous. They had to take specific steps to avoid getting radiation. They had to take specific procedures to make this uranium. What they would do is the uranium powder is dissolved in a nitric acid in the dissolution tube. The mixture would then be pumped into a taller tank called a buffer tank, then slowly transferred into a wider tank known as the precipitation tank, which would be mechanically stirred. And the buffer tank, which was the taller tank, prevented the fuel from going critical, which basically means it wouldn't have its max potential of energy when they were stirring it. And the design of these tanks actually control the flow of mixtures into a wider tank to stop the chemicals from going critical, which basically means all the workers in that area would get hit with a blast of radiation. So they really didn't want the thing to go critical. But in 1996, the company's policy then started to change. So instead of dissolving the uranium oxide in a dissolution tank, workers were actually told to put it in a metal bucket and just stir it, just to speed up the process. But then it was modified again just to speed up the process even more. So instead of doing the dissolution part, they would just dump it right into the end tank, which was the precipitation tank. So workers were actually told to ignore the other 2 tanks and just do it themselves just to speed up the process. But this was really dangerous because these 2 tanks actually prevented accidents from happening. On September 30th, 1999, Hisashi Uchi and Masato Shinohara were mixing up a batch of fuel, while their supervisor was sitting a couple feet away. They were supposed to be mixing 2,400 grams of enriched uranium, but instead they were accidentally mixing 16,000 grams of enriched uranium, and this was really dangerous. Around 10:30 a.m., a blue flash actually came from the bucket, and the 3 workers instantly felt nauseous. What they didn't know is that this blue light was straight radiation. A bunch of co-workers heard about this happening around them, so they would grab hazmat suits, put it on, and then bring these men to the hospital. If you don't know, radiation is actually calculated in sieverts, or millisieverts. The people that were in Chernobyl were actually exposed to 6 sieverts or 6,000 millisieverts. And the normal amount of radiation people take in on a daily basis is around 20 millisieverts. And the lethal dose is between 1,000 to 5,000 millisieverts. The supervisor was sitting 4 meters away from this man actually received 3,000 millisieverts of radiation. Shinohara received around 10,000 millisieverts of radiation, while Ouchi received the most at 17,000 millisieverts. This is the most amount of radiation that has ever entered a human's body in history. So when they took these men to the hospital, the first hospital actually could not take care of these men. They would actually have to get transferred to another hospital known as Tokyo Universal Hospital. Dr. Maikawa would actually hear about these 3 men in the news. He was actually selected to take care of them because of his expertise in radiation medicine. He said he knew it was really bad because all the people that were around him, including the nurses, were all in hazmat suits. When Uchi met the team, they noticed that he wasn't really like disorganized. Like, he was acting pretty normal. That he was fully responsive and he could actually just talk to them normally. The only thing that was wrong was that his right arm was really swollen and his skin had reddish burns that looked like sunburn. One nurse even believed that he was good enough to go home that same day. But what they didn't know is that the radiation in his body was actually destroying all his chromosomes. In the human body, our cells shed and make new cells. Our chromosomes contain the codes for the replication of all cell types, which is very important. The cell reproduction is basically impossible without chromosomes. When they got back his blood work results, this is when they understood the real size of the problem. Normally, chromosomes have an organized pattern and can really be identified quite easily. But Aochi's chromosomes were unorganized, fused, and even mutated, which basically means that after the first layer of cells are done, the other layers can't reproduce. What it means, his chromosomes are completely unusable and his cells can no longer reproduce. But this explains why he looks healthy, because once that first batch of cells completely depletes, then he would start to feel the real consequences. They also noticed his white blood cells completely dropped. So now they actually have to move into a complete sterile room with no one being allowed in it because he's very prone to infection. And the first thing the doctor did was look for a cell donor to give his body the ability to make white blood cells again. But lucky for him, his sister actually volunteered to give him some of her white blood cells now. And for the next 2 days, the doctors would withdraw her blood. And now the medical staff is really hoping that his body takes these cells. But the sad part is they would not know until 10 days after. The doctor even allowed his family to come to see him regularly so they understand the truth of what's going on with him. And within the next couple of days, this is where his body would start to deteriorate. His skin would then begin to lose elasticity and start to fall apart. The staff even noticed every time they took off medical tape off of his body, a piece of skin would actually start coming off with the medical tape. And then this is when they would stop putting medical tape on his body. They also noticed that he was struggling to breathe because his airways were getting filled with fluid. So they considered putting him on a ventilation system, but they noticed that he wasn't completely not breathing and they didn't want him to stop talking to his family just yet. There was a practice in Japan called Zenbazodu, also known as the act of folding 1,000 origami cranes in thought to bring good health. So since his white blood cell count was so low, they couldn't actually bring the cranes into the room with him. So they just left it outside his room just to give him that good luck. So now 10 days have passed since his sister actually gave him her white blood cells. They noticed that his system actually took the white blood cells and implanted themselves in his body. The doctor would see 2 red spots, which basically mean that the transplant was very successful. And now his white blood cells level were actually going back to normal. But 2 days later, they did another blood work on him and they noticed that the chromosomes that were implanted in his body were now completely damaged. And they think the radiation from the other cells were leaking out and actually infecting the chromosomes. His intestine walls started to burst open and he started to lose a lot of blood. They even had to do 10 blood transplants within half a day on this man. They moved him into a room where the bed could start to move so they can get his blood circulating more. They also noticed that he had a lot of bed sores and his eyes started to bleed. They noticed his skin was seeping moisture and he was losing around 10 liters of water every single day. I'm drinking some water. The only option left was a skin transplant. But when they tried to give him this skin transplant, his skin would not take it. And the reason it wasn't taking it is because his skin was actually falling off. So every time they gave him that, it would just deteriorate. With all of the transplant, the transfusions, and blood loss, his heart now starts beating at 120 beats per minute, which is basically like he was running a marathon. So if you really think about it, if you're sitting there, right, if you're in a resting spot, your heart rate's around 60 to maybe even 70. He's literally lying down on a bed with his heart rate at 120 beats per minute. So this is already just not like good. And the doctor was walking by his room and he noticed that his heart stopped. So now he runs over to him, giving him CPR, brought him back to life, but this was taking a detrimental toll on his body. His heart would even stop 3 more times after he got revived. But after dying and getting revived around 4 more different times, his brain and body started to shut down and now he was fully unconscious. And this would get really bad because now his white blood cells would actually start attacking his own body. The doctors were now giving up, like there's nothing else to do, there's nothing else we could do. so we're just gonna call it quits. But his family urged them to keep pushing and keep trying to get him back on his 2 feet. The doctor would actually call his family into a room to tell them the severity of the situation. He would tell them that if his heart stops one more time, he doesn't think there's a real reason to keep reviving. So the family, hearing this, they finally came to conclusion and said, okay, if his heart stops one more time, you guys don't have to reviving, and they signed off on it. He had undergone repeated blood transfusion, skin grafts, he'd been giving stem cell transplant, and was breathing from a mechanical respirator. His skin rotted away, his eyes couldn't close even when he slept because they had no eyelids. He was in incredible pain at all times, but he was still alive. On day 83, his wife and son would actually visit him one last time. The tape that was around his face was removed and his wife started crying. His son still had hope, but it was really messed up because on that night that his wife and son visited, his heart would eventually stop and then he would die. Some people believe that he was kept alive way more than he should have been. They believe the doctors were keeping him alive to do experiments on him to see how they could treat someone with really bad radiation. And he was also begging to die, but they wouldn't let him die. But this is not true. What actually happened was the family was requesting the doctors and begging with these doctors to keep him alive, to keep seeing if he can get better and better and better. And they had a really good hopes that these doctors were going to get him back on his 2 feet. But sadly, that didn't happen and he ended up dead. Comment your thoughts down below and tell me what else I should do for a story. And that's the end of the story. If you guys like this video, please like, and also check out my TikTok, my other TikTok account, my Instagram account, and please follow them all. And if you're from these accounts, thank you for subscribing. And also like the video. Just like the video. Please like the video. If you like the video, I will like you.